The ground trembled. That's how it started. Not with a roar, not with a fight, but with a tremor. As if the African savanna itself was holding its breath. 37-year-old wildlife videographer Daniel Kessler had filmed predators for a decade, but nothing, not even face-to-face standoffs with charging rhinos, had prepared him for this. He was following a pride from a distance, camera rolling, crouched in the dry underbrush, heat shimmering in the air. Then the male lion broke rank. The big cat, a towering, scarred beast known by locals as Kovu, left the pride in a slow, deliberate stride, carrying something small in his massive jaws. Daniel leaned forward, breath caught. Was it a kill? No. It was moving, a cub. Tiny, golden, limp. Daniel's heart pounded. No way, he whispered into the camera mic, he's bringing it toward me. It made no sense. Adult male lions rarely interact gently with cubs, especially not ones this young. And Kovu, the most feared alpha in this region of the Masai Mara, was notoriously territorial. Yet here he was approaching a human. Step by step. Daniel froze. Not from fear but awe. The massive lion paused 10 feet from him, close enough to smell the musk and dust off its mane. Then he laid the cub on the ground. Their eyes locked. And Kovu backed away. Not in fear. Not in surrender. In trust. Daniel, still kneeling, stared at the trembling cub. Its sides barely rose. Its little tongue lolled out, dry and cracked. It was barely alive. What the hell is happening? He murmured. But instinct kicked in faster than reason. He dropped his camera, grabbed his pack and crawled forward slowly, speaking in a low, steady voice. Okay, little one, hang in there. The lion watched from a few yards away, not moving, not blinking, as if waiting to see what Daniel would do next. The cub was burning up. Feverish. Dehydrated. A wound on its flank oozed infection, and its tiny paws were cracked and raw. Daniel's hands shook as he opened a water canister, wetting a cloth and dripping droplets into the cub's mouth. The cub barely twitched. Kovu gave a low rumble, not a growl but something else. A warning? A plea? Daniel looked up. I'm trying, he said aloud, voice tight. I'm trying to save him. Incredibly, the lion stayed. An hour later, the rest of the pride emerged, but kept their distance. The lionesses paced and circled, but none came closer than 30 feet. Daniel had never seen anything like it. It was as if Kovu had spoken for them all, and now they waited on his word. The savanna was eerily quiet. Then a horrible realization hit him. The cub, he hadn't seen it before. It wasn't one of the 6 healthy cubs he'd been documenting with the pride over the past week. This one was new. Different. Smaller. Where had it come from? Why was Kovu, of all lions, breaking the rules of nature to bring it to a man? And most importantly, what had happened to this little lion's mother? Daniel wrapped the cub gently in his shirt and pulled out his emergency satellite phone. I need a medical evac for a lion cub. Critical condition, he said when the vet station picked up. There was silence on the other end. Hey, what? You heard me. I've got a dying cub, and a lion that just handed it to me. Are you injured? No. Are you safe? He looked up. Kovu was still there. Not moving. Watching. I don't know. As the helicopter approached, the sound split the sky, and that's when Kovu roared. A long, guttural, echoing sound that made the ground vibrate. The entire pride responded in kind, but they didn't charge. They didn't scatter. They stood still, surrounding Daniel and the cub like a protective ring. It wasn't aggression. It was a send-off. A farewell. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest as the chopper's skids touched the grass. A vet jumped down, grabbed the cub from his arms and began work immediately. Fever's too high, she muttered. We need antibiotics now. Daniel nodded, dazed. Do you see them? The pride. She glanced over her shoulder. Her jaw dropped. The lions had all sat down. All of them. In a perfect circle, facing outward. Backs to Daniel, backs to the cub. They're guarding us, she whispered. The flight back to the wildlife sanctuary was short, but the mystery only deepened. The cub's condition was touch and go. It had signs of internal infection, stress trauma, and shockingly, no signs of maternal licking or care. It hadn't been fed in days. Daniel sat beside the incubator, mind racing. If the cub wasn't from Kovu's pride, if it hadn't been cared for by a mother, if it had been abandoned, or worse, taken. His stomach churned. Something was wrong out there. Back in the reserve, he downloaded his footage. Frame by frame, he studied the moment Kovu dropped the cub. One detail jumped out and hit him like a punch to the gut. A human footprint. Right behind where the cub had been placed. Fresh. and not Daniel's. The footprint was wrong. Too big for Daniel's boot. Too deep for a ranger's lightweight tread. And fresh, just a few hours old. It hadn't been there when Daniel first scouted the area that morning. That meant someone else had been in the bush, near Kovu's pride. But who? Daniel froze the video and enhanced the still frame, heart thudding. The print had a jagged edge at the toe, like a missing chunk of sole. It wasn't just any shoe, it looked like military grade. He pulled out his phone and dialed Dr. Seema Patel, lead vet and wildlife crime liaison at the Mara Wildlife Crisis Unit. "I've got something," he said the moment she answered. "Is the cub stable?" "Barely. But that's not it. Check your inbox. I'm sending you a frame." Seconds later, she let out a low hiss through her teeth. "That's not a ranger boot." "I know. You think this cub was left there, or worse, dropped there, by someone who didn't want to be seen. Kovu just found it first." Silence. Then, "Get here. Now." The rescue chopper touched down at the crisis unit's main sanctuary an hour later. Daniel stepped out, clutching his camera bag like a lifeline. Inside the clinic, the cub lay motionless inside a temperature-controlled oxygen crib. Tubes snaked into its tiny limbs, and its breath rattled with every shallow inhale. Dr. Patel hovered beside it, adjusting in 4-line. "We're fighting for him," she said without looking up. "High-grade infection. Bite wounds. And..." She paused, lips tightening. "Evidence of blunt force trauma. Someone hit him. Hard." Daniel swore under his breath. "But why? Who hurts a lion cub?" She finally looked at him. "Poachers don't. But traffickers do." Daniel's stomach turned. Wildlife trafficking wasn't just about ivory or rhino horn. There was a booming black market for exotic animals, lion cubs included. Wealthy buyers wanted them as pets, symbols of power, even performers. And they paid handsomely. A healthy cub could sell for over $20,000 on the underground market. Dr. Patel pointed to a healing scar above the cub's eye. This wasn't made by another animal. This was a metal edge. Likely a cage door. Daniel sat down heavily. So someone took this cub, but Kovu got to it first? Or found it, abandoned, wounded, and decided to intervene? She shook her head. That's not lion behavior. Especially not for a male. Daniel leaned forward, the memory of that moment blazing in his mind, Kovu's eyes. The deliberate choice. The trust. Maybe he knew what it was like to lose a cub, he murmured. Maybe he remembered. Dr. Patel gave him a long look. Or maybe he knew who took it. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in a cot near the clinic, the sound of machines keeping the cub alive humming softly. At 2:14 a.m., his phone buzzed, a message from one of the rangers he'd called in for backup. The man had scouted the area where Kovu had appeared earlier that day. Daniel sat up fast as he opened the image. A torn plastic crate. Blood. A broken syringe. Coordinates tagged it less than a mile from Kovu's last location. Daniel stood up, grabbed his packing gear and headed straight for the ranger's hut. By sunrise they reached the site. It was worse than expected. There were tire tracks, deep from heavy transport. More footprints. Boot prints. Cigarette butts. And the unmistakable reek of rotting meat. The rangers fanned out. One called Daniel over. "We found another crate. Empty." Daniel approached it. The metal bars were bent. Something had fought its way out. Fur stuck to one side. Lion fur. Could it be the cub's mother? Daniel asked quietly. Possibly. Or another adult. Then came the chilling discovery, a small radio tag. Broken, burned, but still bearing the branding of a private game farm over 300 kilometers away. Daniel's voice dropped. They were transporting them, to sell. Or worse, said a ranger grimly. Some of these farms sell cubs to canned hunting outfits. Bred in captivity, shot in enclosures. Daniel's jaw tightened. That meant this wasn't just a one-off. This was part of a bigger operation. And somehow, Kovu had found the cub before it was too late. Back at the sanctuary, the cub's condition worsened. Its fever spiked again. It began seizing. Daniel and Dr. Patel rushed in. "We're losing him," she shouted. "Get the med kit, naltrexone and dextrose now." Daniel held the cub gently as the vet administered the shots, his hands damp with sweat. "Stay with me, little guy," he whispered. Come on, come on." The cub gasped. Then its body went still. "No, no, no, no," Daniel began, but then a twitch. A cough. A shudder. Then breath. The cub wasn't gone. "He's still fighting," Dr. Patel said softly. But he's on the edge. Daniel stared down at the tiny, fragile body and felt his throat tighten. Why had Kovu chosen him? How had he known this man, this stranger, would fight for his cub? The next morning, Daniel uploaded his footage to a secure drive and contacted an investigative journalist he trusted, Layla Morgan, a well-known voice in anti-poaching activism. "Someone's smuggling lion cubs through the Mara," he said. "And I have footage. A footprint. A GPS tag from a burned cage. Are you telling me you caught a trafficking op on camera? And I have a lion as a witness." She didn't even pause. "I'll be on the next flight." Meanwhile, word began to spread. Not just among officials, but among animals. That very evening, a field scout spotted something unbelievable. Kovu again. Near the sanctuary. Alone. He was watching the fence. The cub hadn't even opened its eyes in 48 hours, but somehow the lion knew where it was. And he had come to check. Daniel rushed out with a tranquilizer team in case things got dangerous, but Kovu didn't approach. He simply stood in the dusk, mane rustling in the warm wind, and roared. "What? Oh." Long mournful. Then he turned and walked back into the bush. 2 days later, the cub opened its eyes. Tiny amber eyes. Faintly glowing. Alive. Daniel was there to see it. "He made it," he whispered. Dr. Patel smiled, exhausted but triumphant. "Now we just need to keep him stable. And pray." They named him TMU, Swahili for sweet, but also used for something precious, something rare. And TMU was rare. A cub not just rescued from poachers but delivered by a lion. A cub whose life carried a secret, and a message. That evening, Daniel sat beside the sleeping cub, camera in hand. He began recording a video journal. "If you're watching this," he said, "then you've just seen something no one believed was possible. A male lion, an apex predator, chose to trust a human. He walked past his instinct, his pride, his fear, and gave his cub to me. I don't know yet who tried to take this cub. I don't know how many others are out there. But I promise you." He looked down at TMU. "I will find them." The clinic lights dimmed for the night, casting a soft golden glow over little TMU's crib. He slept quietly, belly slowly rising and falling beneath a blanket, tiny paws twitching now and then as if dreaming of something far away. Maybe grasslands. Maybe safety. Maybe his father. Daniel sat in the corner, his back against the wall, camera in his lap. He hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, but something wouldn't let him rest. Not yet. Because something was off. Deeply off. He picked up the boot print photo again, zoomed in. Then again to the crate, the burned GPS tag, the scattered syringes, like breadcrumbs leading into something rotten. And Kovu, how had he known? Dr. Patel walked in, rubbing her eyes with one hand, a folder in the other. "Blood work just came back," she said quietly. "You're going to want to sit down." Daniel tensed. "Is it bad?" "Not for TMU. For us." She opened the folder and laid out 2 pages, side-by-side lab reports. One was TMU's. The other was labeled, Kova, deceased, 2023. Daniel stared at the name. Kova? Lioness. Part of Kova's pride. She died last year. Pregnant. Poachers found her before we could. Daniel blinked. "Wait. Then." Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "We ran comparative DNA testing because something wasn't adding up. TMU's genome was familiar. And? She was his mother." Daniel's heart dropped. "So he wasn't just a cub," Dr. Patel continued. "He was her cub. The one we thought was never born." Daniel felt the world tip sideways. "You're saying Kovu found his dead mate's cub, alive?" "I'm saying," Dr. Patel said, voice low, "Kova didn't just hand you a cub. He handed you his son. A son he thought was lost forever." Back in the field, new evidence arrived. Layla Morgan, the investigative journalist, had landed on site and brought with her a massive lead. She'd uncovered internal documents from a game farm linked to exotic animal auctions. One manifest stood out. It listed the transfer of a pregnant lioness, captured in 2023, from an unregistered holding site to a known breeding facility near the Mara. But the mother was reported as deceased on arrival. Except, no cub was declared. The entry was flagged with a red stamp, retained, export pending. Layla's eyes burned with anger as she pointed at the page. "That means the cub survived and they kept it." Daniel shook his head. "For what? To sell it? Or raise it until it was old enough to breed? They call it conservation. But it's slavery." Daniel stood, rage boiling in his gut. "And now that it escaped, or was rescued, they'll be looking for it. Worse, Layla said grimly. They'll try to cover it up. Burn every record. Eliminate witnesses. Daniel's fists clenched. Not if we get there first. That night TMU cried. It was the first real sound he'd made, a tiny, pained wail from the oxygen crib, like a kitten calling out in a storm. Daniel rushed to his side. The vet was already adjusting meds, soothing him with soft clicks. Pain's setting in, she said. The bruising's deep. He may have broken ribs we missed. Daniel reached through the opening, gently touching the cub's head. TMU blinked at him with those burning gold eyes, so much like his father's. And then, softly he mewed. Not in fear. Not in pain. But as if asking for him. Daniel nearly broke. I'm here, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere. The next day a drone sweep was launched. Daniel, Layla, and a team of rangers reviewed real-time aerial footage of the area surrounding the site where the cage was found. What they saw chilled them. A temporary outpost, hidden in the dense brush with metal crates, trucks, and armed men patrolling. And in one of those crates, a lion. Not TMU. An adult lioness. She was pacing, emaciated, her ribs clearly visible, eyes wild with fear. She's alive, Daniel said. Another one. Layla stared at the footage. We need proof. And then we shut them down. Daniel's hand hovered over his camera. No, he said. We don't wait. That evening they moved in. The operation had to be quick, silent. Poaching rings weren't just dangerous, they were deadly. With the help of local rangers and 2 covert wildlife task force agents, Daniel and Layla hiked through the bush under cover of darkness. Every breath was held. Every step placed with care. The scent hit them first, blood, meat, and diesel. Then the sounds. A low growl. Metal rattling. Laughter. They reached the perimeter, crouched low, scanning through the undergrowth. A man stood near a cage, poking at the lioness with a long stick. She snarled but couldn't fight, too weak. Daniel raised his lens, heart pounding. I've got him, he whispered. Recording now. Good, Layla murmured. Because we're calling this in. But just as she raised her radio, a twig snapped. Everything exploded. Who's there? Someone shouted. Flashlights flared. Dogs barked. Men ran toward the sound of movement. Daniel and Layla bolted through the brush, cameras secured, adrenaline slamming through their veins. Shots rang out behind them, warning shots but loud enough to remind them this was no game. They didn't stop until they hit the ridge. Panting, Daniel turned and looked back. Smoke had begun rising from the outpost. They're burning it, he said. Layla pulled out her sat phone. But they can't burn the cloud. Their footage was already uploading to a secure server. The names, faces, and location, all of it. The next morning TMU took his first steps. Wobbly. Fragile. But real. Daniel was there, filming. And this time his hands weren't shaking. Dr. Patel knelt beside the cub. He's healing, she said softly. Against all odds. He's not just healing, Daniel said. He's home. That afternoon, a ranger burst into the clinic with a radio pressed to his ear. They found something, he said, eyes wide. You need to come. Now. The jeep skidded to a halt. And there, just beyond the crest of the hill, stood Kovu. But he wasn't alone. 2 lionesses flanked him. One limping. The other young but alert. And behind them, for cubs. One limping cub was covered in burrs and dirt, but clearly bore the same golden pattern as TMU. Daniel raised his binoculars, stunned. These are the survivors, he whispered. From the poacher site. Kovu roared, a deep, commanding sound, and the pride began to move toward the treeline. But not before the limping cub stopped. He turned, looked directly at Daniel across the distance, and let out a small, shaky growl. Recognition. And then he followed the pride. Back at the sanctuary, Daniel stood at TMU's crib as the cub slept peacefully, a soft blanket pulled up under his chin. You have siblings, he whispered. And a father who crossed every line of instinct to protect you. TMU stood on all 4 paws now, stronger than ever. His coat had thickened, a soft golden fire under the sanctuary lights, and his eyes, once dull from dehydration and pain, gleamed with that same piercing intensity Daniel had seen in Kovu. But it was his posture that stopped everyone cold. He wasn't cowering anymore. He stood tall, ears forward, chin lifted. A prince learning how to be a king. 2 weeks had passed since the raid, and the fallout had been nothing short of nuclear. The footage Daniel captured went viral overnight. It was everywhere. News broadcasts, social media feeds, conservation pages. Clips of armed poachers taunting caged lions. Of tiny TMU learning to walk. of Kovu's impossible sacrifice. And then the twist. The moment the public found out the lion gave away his own cub to save it from a human trafficking ring. It was unprecedented. Millions commented. Tens of millions watched. And for the first time in years, global outrage shifted into global action. Donations flooded into wildlife agencies. Pressure mounted on corrupt officials. 2 ministers were suspended. One poaching syndicate was publicly dismantled. And amidst it all, the legend of Kovu began to grow. But Daniel wasn't done. One evening, as a rainstorm whispered outside the clinic, he sat across from Dr. Patel and Layla, holding a satellite photo from the latest aerial scan. "It's him," Daniel said. "He's moving north." Kovu and his pride had been tracked by paw prints and motion sensors, steadily migrating toward a protected range near the edge of a lion corridor, a stretch of land not yet swallowed by farms or fences. But something was wrong. Daniel pointed to the path. "He's limping again. The tracker shows uneven speed. Either he's hurt, or he's stalling for the others." Dr. Patel leaned in. "There's a cliff pass near that area. Dangerous terrain. If they're heading into that, they could be cornered." Layla didn't hesitate. "Then we go." At dawn the team moved fast. The new ranger unit included tranquilizer specialists, aerial spotters and Daniel's own film crew, who had, by now, become seasoned survivalists. They reached the ridge by noon. And what they saw made every heart freeze. Kovu's pride had been pushed against a steep drop. On one side, sharp rocks and cliffs. On the other, a group of men with illegal tracking equipment, clearly hoping to corner the lions and dart them. It was happening again. Daniel grabbed his camera. Layla radioed for backup. Dr. Patel loaded darts. And in the chaos, Daniel noticed something else. Kovu was walking with a limp. His front leg was injured. But he still stood between the humans and his pride, growling, defiant. A lion standing against an army. And then, he charged. It wasn't an attack. It was a distraction. Kovu ran straight toward the poachers, roaring so loudly the entire valley echoed. He wasn't trying to kill, he was trying to buy time. And it worked. As the poachers scrambled, the lionesses bolted left, carrying the cubs into a nearby ravine. Daniel didn't think. He dropped his camera, tore down the slope and tackled the man holding the dart rifle. A shot fired into the dirt. 2 rangers tackled the others. And within moments the remaining poachers were subdued, zip-tied and disarmed. Daniel spun just in time to see Kovu collapse. He ran, heart in his throat. Kovu. The lion was panting hard, blood oozing from a deep wound near his shoulder. Not from a gun, but from barbed wire. The same fencing used by illegal farms in the south. Dr. Patel slid in, opened her kit and nodded to Daniel. "Hold him. Don't flinch." Daniel knelt by Kovu's head. The lion's eyes found his. And for a moment, they were just 2 fathers. One with a camera. One with a crown. "I've got you," Daniel whispered. The tranquilizer worked fast, putting Kovu under just enough to clean and stitch the wound. And when it was done, they didn't leave. They carried him. Back up the slope. Back toward hope. 3 days later, Kovu awoke in a massive outdoor enclosure, custom built on the edge of the wildlife corridor. Grasslands stretched wide behind him. A cool stream flowed through. Shade. Space. No bars. And standing just outside the enclosure gate was TMU. Not afraid. Not hiding. He let out a soft, unsure growl. Kovu lifted his head, still weak. And for the first time in his young life, TMU called out. A full, high-pitched roar. Kovu blinked slowly, and responded. A low, rumbling purr like thunder from the earth itself. The gate opened, and TMU stepped inside. No one dared speak. Not Daniel. Not the rangers. Not even Dr. Patel. They watched as TMU approached slowly, ears back, tail low, instinctively respectful. Kovu didn't move. He waited. And when TMU finally reached him, he collapsed into his father's mane. They didn't separate again. Over the next month, TMU thrived. Eating full meals, running, pouncing on shadows, and always returning to Kovu's side. The other lionesses were released nearby, all within protected boundaries, a rewilding plan in motion. Daniel filmed every second. He called the documentary, "The Lion Who Gave His Cub Away," and it changed everything. Animal trafficking was no longer some distant crime. It had a face, a voice, a family. Lions weren't just icons on a flag or symbols in storybooks. They were fathers who grieved, cubs who cried, families who fought to survive. On the day TMU was officially released into the protected corridor, Free to roam with Kovu and his pride, a crowd gathered behind the viewing fence. Children, conservationists, reporters, locals who had once feared lions now holding signs that said, "Protect the pride. Every life matters." TMU taught us. Daniel gave a short speech. He didn't talk about himself. He talked about them. About the lion who defied instinct. About the cub who beat death. And about how we, the humans, had been the real beasts, until now. TMU's final shot in the documentary was simple. He stood beside his father on a hilltop, wind lifting his fur, the setting sun painting him in gold. He roared. And for the first time, it echoed back. Share this story if you believe every life deserves protection. Comment below, would you have taken the cub in? Subscribe to Lion's Shield for more true rescues that will touch your heart. Together we can change how the world sees wildlife, one story at a time.